BC has just announced its plan to reopen its economy in a phased approach. The big takeaway in a few weeks' time. If you live in BC, you'll be able to expand your social circle a little bit. Your kids will be able to go on a play date or see their grandparents. We're also getting a fresh glimpse, I should say, at how Canadians right across the board are feeling about that reopening of economies in their provinces. Christian Bourque is the Vice President of Leger. He joins us from Montreal. David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data. They've both been polling on this issue, and they're here to share some of the information that they have. Great to see you both. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Christian, why don't I start with you on this question, I think the central question of how comfortable Canadians are with restrictions being loosened. What did you find?
We found that most Canadians are fairly prudent, 64%, so 2 out of 3 Canadians say maintain the pace of relaxing social distancing measures that we are currently seeing. So they're okay with the pace at which governments are going right now. And there's not a lot of Canadians, only 12% overall nationally, but it's the same across all regions, who are saying we should put the pedal to the metal. That approach that we're seeing in the United States, for example, does not really, for now, exist in Canada.
And David, what about you? Are you finding something similar?
We're finding actually very similar numbers. We get, when you dig a little deeper and you try to understand why that caution is there, our analysis suggests it's primarily because most people are still, their number one factor in determining their worry about the pandemic is the risk of getting the disease themselves. Health and their own personal security rank really high. And then the second most important factor is the fear of a second spike. So if those two factors are primarily driving whether somebody is really worried about this issue or not, there's going to be a lot of hesitation about getting back out and doing the things they were doing before it all started.
I just want to follow up with you on that because you also did some very specific polling about when they do get back out and doing things that we used to do. What sort of things do they want to see in order to, or what kind of comfort do they have with the kinds of things that might mitigate our risk? And what did you find there?
Yeah, well, today we looked at a few scenarios and understood what conditions would make people feel comfortable going back. So for an example, going out to sit at a restaurant and eat in a restaurant, what do you need to see? And for 30% of Canadians, they said, what I need to see is a vaccine. That's probably the only thing that's going to make me comfortable. 7% said, I'm fine going now. Let me out and I'll go have a dinner. For everybody else, the vast majority of the country, most wanted to see evidence that the facility was being cleaned, the restaurant was being cleaned regularly, that there was enough room for them to distance themselves from others, that there was some procedure in place to reduce perhaps the number of people. Even 1 out of 5 of those who had some conditions said, I'd like to see most people in the restaurant have a mask. So I do see that, and it's different depending on the scenario we tested, but for the most part, there's a sizable number of people who say, I'm not quite sure I'm going to be comfortable doing this at all. And are those who are open to it, they are going to need to see evidence that when I go into a restaurant, when I go into a movie theater, when I go back to work, that there are some procedures in place that make me feel that I'm safe and that not only my employer or the restaurant or the business is very mindful that I am still I'm still fearful about getting this virus.
Christian, what are you finding on that? You really got a feel for restaurants after hearing that. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, we pretty much have the same identical data. What we found over the past 2 to 3 weeks is a bit of a shift. We're seeing more and more an urban-rural split that we were not seeing early in the crisis. And one of the issues in terms of Canadians going back to work is the issue of only a quarter of those who used to take public transit to go to work would want to get on public transit now to go back to work. So I think that throughout the few weeks ahead of us, we'll be seeing sort of that split between sort of Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and the larger cities saying, wait a minute here, I'm not ready to go back. I'm not ready to get involved in all of those activities because I need to get around. Whereas we're seeing right now that, for example, the example of David for restaurants, we're already seeing that in rural areas, you're going to that mom and pop restaurant that you were used to go to, there's a lot more of a sense of comfort in doing that. The more you get closer to our major cities, the more people are actually still pretty much afraid of going back to what they used to.
That's so interesting. And we know, for example, in those big cities, we've seen many of the politicians there talk in the past few days about how the peak may not even have been reached, especially in those big cities. Speaking of politicians, Christian, I know you also looked at confidence in the government. What did you find there?
I think it's rather amazing. What we found throughout the last 6 weeks is that Canadians, because it's a time of crisis, it's almost like we're doing wartime polling in the sense of people sort of rally behind their institutions. Level of trust in our institutions has gone up over the past 6 weeks. And certainly, for example, if I told you, 2 months ago, do you think that Doug Ford will have a satisfaction rating of 84%? You would have never taken that bet, right? But that's where we are today. I think people are basically responding to this crisis by saying we need to rally behind our governments. And so far, so good. I mean, they're saying that governments are doing the right thing in Canada. And I never would have expected these sort of high levels of confidence in what our public institutions are putting into place.
David, I have 30 seconds left. I want to get you to weigh in on that as well, though. What are you seeing?
Yeah, we're seeing the same trend. And at least for the time being, it seems that some of the factors that traditionally drive someone's view of the prime minister or his government or a provincial premier or their governments is partisanship. And right now, it seems to be weak. It doesn't mean it's going to persist and that after this is over, we're going to get back to being a much more polarized country. But yeah, when I see 80 to 90% of a provincial population or nationally say, I think the government's doing well or as well as can be expected, this is an unprecedented period that demonstrates just how much Canadians are rallying around our leaders and hoping they are successful in getting this solved.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you both so much for your time this evening. Great to see you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Vashi.
Thanks to Christian Bourque of Leger and David Coletto of Abacus Data. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.